Good afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Plant Engineering's webcast series, Recruiting and Retaining Top Talent. I'm your moderator, Bob Vavra. I'm happy to join you today on behalf of Plant Engineering. Our speaker this afternoon is Chuck Park. He graduated in 1985 from the University of Tennessee, majoring in industrial engineering. After a career with companies such as TRW, Snapper Power Equipment, Maytag, and Whirlpool, Chuck returned to the University of Tennessee to earn his MBA, and in 2007 accepted a faculty position with the University of Tennessee Center for Executive Education. In 2010, he became Executive Director of the non-degree programs at the Center for Executive Education. Chuck's been heavily involved in UT's educational support of the aerospace and defense sectors, is a lead faculty for many of the leadership programs and development of the non-degree courses, and is a leadership coach for numerous executive-level MBA programs. He also supports the strategic planning and problem-solving events with the Y-12 nuclear facility via a joint appointment. If you have any technical questions during our presentation today, click on that question mark screen. If you're experiencing any issues with your slides or audio, please refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button under the presenter's headshot. You can control the volume setting by adjusting the volume on your computer or on the webcast platform. And if you need a technician, type a message into the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Individual technical questions will be answered on the left side of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put those in and we'll get to as many of those as we have time for after today's presentation. We wanted to begin today with a little context before Chuck started his presentation. Plant Engineering recently completed a study of its readers to talk about the issue of workforce development. And one of the things that's important to note about this issue is that for the last 8 years in our salary survey, Plant Engineering has asked readers what is the most important issue that they face on the plant floor. And it's not taxes, it's not government, it's not the outsourcing of jobs. The number one issue that plant managers say that they face on a daily basis is finding and retaining talent. And that's the basis of a lot of the work that we've done at Plant Engineering on this issue. Talking about to our readers about their views on manufacturing and how they think manufacturing is seen within their community. More than half don't believe manufacturing is seen by the general public as a positive career choice, even though most of them, 85%, said that their manufacturing plant is seen as positive in their community. So the local perception of manufacturing, which is very, very positive, and the national perception of manufacturing are widely divergent. And that goes to an issue that we've seen quite a bit, which is that local manufacturing is seen as a value in local communities, but the overall reputation of manufacturing on a national basis still needs some polishing, and that's one of the issues that I think is going to be very important as we talk about workforce development going forward. And that local involvement is something that we asked our readers about as well. More than half of our manufacturers are members of their Chamber of Commerce. More than 40% sponsor community events and sports activities. About a quarter are involved in vocational education in the area. Only about 16% have an open house every year, and that we think is important because it gives manufacturers an opportunity to show the community what they actually do rather than allow people to perceive what manufacturing is all about. The closer the community can get to see what actually goes on in these manufacturing facilities, the stronger their bond is going to be in the community. To improve manufacturing as a career choice, the number one area is change the view of the media. We have seen an emergence and an evolving growth in the reputation of manufacturing over the last couple of years as issues of outsourcing have come up and as manufacturing has led the U.S. economy out of the recession. Education is another key area. Pay and benefits only come up about a quarter of the time. And I think that's another area where we all have a lot to do and to talk about manufacturing as a career and not just as a job. One other area we talked about was the workforce shortage. Almost 60% of the readers that responded to our survey said that they had a shortage of workers in their facility. And 22% said that at least 5% of those jobs were unfilled. That's a huge number of jobs that are going unfilled simply because we can't find enough skilled people to fill the job roles in American manufacturing. And it's a problem for all of us, and it's helping to slow down economic growth. And that's one of the areas that I think everybody can agree on is that the faster we can get productivity raised on the manufacturing front, the stronger the economic growth is going to be. So what are we doing to address the workforce shortage? Well, plant managers tell us that they're ramping up their online recruiting. 6 in 10 say that they're involved in online recruiting. More than half are outreach to community college, and that's been a huge driver of the short-term need for more people involved in manufacturing. The outreach to universities is about 33%, and the outreach to high schools, which is really where the momentum is going to start to build, is about 22%, and we'll be talking with Chuck about that at some point. Only 1 in 5 are working with other manufacturers in their region or reaching out to military veterans, and this is something else that we're going to be talking about during the course of today's presentation. Finally, what are the recruitment challenges? Well, there is a huge disconnect right now between the skills that we need in manufacturing and the skills that applicants are coming to us with. And that, by far, as you can see here, is the leading challenge that manufacturers face, matching skills to the jobs that are involved in modern manufacturing. About a third are facing a lack of applicants, and others are finding a small problem in being able to find time to devote to the recruitment. Fortunately, the lack of support from management is a very minor problem. Our need is more skills for the jobs that need to be done in modern manufacturing today, and that's a great deal of what we've seen the problem to be for quite some time, and where we're going with this in the future. And that's a great segue into Chuck Park's presentation today. It's my pleasure to introduce from the University of Tennessee, Chuck Park. Chuck, good afternoon.
Thank you, Bob, and good afternoon. The reason that I think we're here today and why this topic is important is that there's a pending crisis ahead of us in terms of not only recruiting talent, but retaining it. And so why is this a big issue today? If you look at what's going on out in the workplace and in the economy, you know, we've got organizations that have over the last 5 years, you know, have lost a lot of their capability in terms of recruitment, and also, you know, really lost some of the focus on retention. And, you know, obviously the lack of resources on recruiting is a lot of organizations have been downsizing. And then in terms of retention, you know, in the last 5 years, if you had a job, you spent a lot of time trying to keep it as opposed to shopping for a new job. So we've kind of taken our eye off the ball a little bit, you know, due to some of the economic times that we live in. So what's changing? If you look at what's happening today, I mean, there's some really positive news out there that I think is really going to put some pressure in this area. The first thing is we've got, you know, energy resources that we didn't know we had before. We've got pent-up demand for some of the products that we make the most of domestically. So there's some really good things out there that I think are going to drive, you know, a boom in the manufacturing side. Not to mention, as we see some manufacturers moving jobs and products back to the United States. So we've got some good things happening. But that leads us to some concerns. And if you look at what some of these contributing factors are, most organizations have been in a hiring freeze. We've had a lot of people that have stayed employed longer than they thought they would, just because their 401ks have been decimated in the economic crunch. And now those people are you know, as their 401ks are starting to look a little better, I mean, you know, are looking back at retirement. During the last several years, you've got co-op programs, intern programs, you know, that used to feed the organization with new talent. A lot of those programs are no longer in existence. Hourly training programs have been reduced. Succession planning, has gone by the wayside, and quite frankly, the HR departments don't have the resources that they used to have. So, what does that lead us to? Most of the organizations that we work with, some of the big players in around University of Tennessee, Eastman, Y12, Alcoa. I mean, they're looking at the potential of well over 50% of their workforce will be eligible to retire in the next 1 to 2 years. And so you've got this perfect storm of an increasing demand for young talent and employees, and at the same time a mass exodus of folks of where all that tribal knowledge is today. So the other issue that's coming is we've got the technology that's being put in place. Too often, some of the younger employees just don't have the skill sets that are prepared for that. So it while there's good news in terms of for manufacturers in terms of volume and potential, it brings the concern of how are we going to go out and recruit young talent, and how are we going to retain that talent. And I wanted to look at this from 3 different levels, and that's the salaried workforce level, skilled hourly, and then unskilled or semi-skilled hourly. And just some things from my experience and some of the research of how we might look at doing some things a little bit differently. So starting out at the salary level, from an entry standpoint to, kind of in that 2 to 3 years experience, the most success that I had in my time in leading manufacturing organizations was having a very robust co-op or intern program. And we had, that was typically focused more on engineering, technical resources. But those programs are extremely beneficial, for any major skill set or function. It's always unnerving to hire somebody based solely on an interview. And with a good co-op program, you get the opportunity to see these young men and women at work and what their capabilities are. And the other part of that is they get a good chance to see if your organization is one that they're interested in being with. And so your retention tends to be higher, pulling through a co-op program. And quite frankly, you just have a better idea of what you've got. Now, I want to distinguish between a co-op program and a good co-op program. Too often, these kids come in these co-op programs and are just given some of the some of the just, I guess, grunt work, for lack of a better term, things that aren't terribly interesting. And there's got to be a mix where you build these programs and where these young men and women have the chance to get some exposure, have some interesting projects to do, and I think that will pay off in huge benefits. As Bob mentioned earlier in some of the other research, I mean, having a relationship with local universities, community colleges, an ongoing relationship. We're going on and doing the recruiting there, and in the fields that you're recruiting for, it's not hard to get to know the faculty that are in those areas and get recommendations of who are the ones that are really standing out, and the organizations that build that type of relationship, are the ones that are going to have the edge, and that requires some effort and some time. The next bullet is something that worked extremely well for me in my career, and I think it's even more relevant today. When I would go into an organization where I felt like I had a lapse or a gap in leadership talent, I relied heavily on these junior military conferences where these young captains and majors are getting out of the military after about 5 to 7 years. And the level of leadership capability that our military produces is just remarkable. And I was able to infuse into the organizations that I was responsible for just some tremendous talent coming through those. And there's obviously several different organizations that you can use for that. Bradley Morris, Lucas Group. I mean, there's just several that I've had a great experience with in the past. As most of you are aware, the social media in terms of recruiting now is much more significant. And for those of us that that's not how we came up through the organizations and used. We have to recognize that it's out there, and there's some great tips on how to use social media, to spread the word about your organization and what your opportunities are. The final point on this slide is one that I think every leader really needs to take to heart, and that is, you should always be keeping kind of a notebook of who some potential people are that could you bring into your organization. Every time that I went to a conference, any opportunities of networking and finding talent, I always kept this kind of little notebook for different functions of this is a person I met, here's their contact information, and what I thought that they might be a good fit for in my organization. And with some of the networks out there today, that's even easier than what it used to be. So those are some thoughts in terms of the salary recruiting. And then you get into the skilled hourly. And this is an area that's getting more and more difficult and going to be a problem, I think. Too many technical schools are moving away from some of the skills that are important to manufacturing organizations. And but they're still out there, and leaders are going to have to find those schools and again develop deep relationships, sponsorships to keep those relationships good and pull through that avenue. Again, I have the opportunity in my job at the university to do a tremendous amount of work with the military, specifically the Air Force, and I am absolutely amazed at the caliber of talent and the skill sets that these young men and women have, after, their time in the military. And the other part of this that's extremely relevant is our military is getting ready to go through one of the largest downsizing that we've seen in a long time. And the employers that position themselves, to recruit actively on these young men and women that have chosen to get out of the military, are going to have a significant advantage going forward. The next thing is job fairs, and I put that in there as a statement, really, that organizations need to take ownership in their own recruiting at the hourly level. Many organizations have turned this over to temp-to-hire agencies. And quite frankly, I think this is a horrible mistake to do that, to do all of your hiring through those, and for a couple reasons. One, the goals don't necessarily align in what a temp-to-hire agency is looking for and what the organization's looking for. You've got to be very careful on how the metrics are set up to ensure that alignment. But the bigger issue is, after 5 years of very, very difficult economic times, you're not going to be able to access or recruit as well, at least, the underemployed, people that have taken a step back over the last 5 years and have taken a job less than what they were capable of. And the reason it's so difficult to be able to get to these people who have tremendous talents but are stuck in a job lower than what they're capable of doing is the whole issue of insurance. And so we've got to bridge that gap, and organizations need to have a strategy of how they can bring on new employees, and at the same time still be able to ensure that they're going to have some level of coverage, because it's almost, giving up that health insurance is an anchor for many very talented people to leave a job, that they've been placed in over the last several years. Again, in the hourly rank, social media is a tremendous asset, as well as the network referrals. Going down to some of the recruiting strategies. Sorry, I'm having a little slide issue here. Okay. I'm sorry. Here we go. On the unskilled, semi-skilled, again, same comments in terms of the temp to hire agencies versus the job fairs. And I'm not saying that you have to go all one way or the other. I think a good mix. High school recruiting programs. Several of my colleagues have had tremendous success, going in and recruiting right out of high schools and having opportunities for these young men and women to come out and see what kind of jobs are out there. Several organizations have built kind of earn and learn programs where they recruit out of high school, set aside dollars for college tuition, support, part-time students, referral programs, where you get some idea of what an individual has, through a network. And then one of the best practices that I've seen in this area was when I was with Emerson Electric. They used, when they were bringing in potential hourly employees, they did a pre-employment training class, and where they kept the coaches, part of the training department, were part of that class, and they would just observe behaviors and be able to assess whether somebody looked like they were going to be a good fit or not. So there's certainly some great strategies out there to hedge your bet in terms of getting better people into your organization. Couple things just to think about. If you're not familiar with Moore's Law, which states that computer power is roughly doubling every 18 to 24 months, and at the same time the cost of this technology is rapidly dropping. Basically, what that's telling us is that the technological know-how of the new employee needs to be significantly higher. And it needs to be higher not only for what the technology is today, but for what it's going to be at this exponential rate. So with all this, we're going to have not only trouble recruiting the best and the brightest, but you're also going to have other organizations are going to be aggressively pursuing the talent that you already have. So you've got to be prepared for that, which leads to the next point. Millennials that are coming into the organization, our research would show that if you manage those millennials the same way you treat your baby boomers and Gen Xers, they're a huge risk with retention. So, again, looking at this at three different levels, some retention strategies. Mentoring programs have proven to be very effective. And when I say mentoring, I'm talking about assigning someone to a salaried employee that's not in their direct line of accountability. An interesting little fact about millennials is, based on the research, is a millennial, if you assign them a mentor that's, roughly their parents' age, they almost tend to treat people like that with disdain because their lack of technological savvy. Whereas if they have a mentor that's closer to their grandparents' age, the relationship tends to be much better. Millennials basically need a lot more feedback than what we've been used to giving. Career planning, they tend to have more aggressive schedules in terms of advancement. And so it's really a requirement, to kind of help calibrate what those expectations are, and also work with the millennials in terms of a career plan. Succession planning, understanding who your high potentials are, who's at risk, how do you fill those jobs. Again, a lot of that has gone by the wayside over the last several years. It's shown, some of the research on millennials also shows the importance of having a social network at work to help ground them in terms of retention. And the other kind of interesting thing on the research of millennials is their need to make a difference both at work and outside of work. They want to be impactful. So setting up within the organization, giving them challenging assignments, but also opportunities to do things outside of work that are work-related. Habitat for Humanity comes to mind. So then there's all sorts of opportunities to do that. On the hourly side, skilled hourly. You've got to keep these folks on the forefront with the technical training, and over a broad base, not a myopic technical training path, but something that's really more multi-skilled. Paying for performance and skills. I've been with several organizations that have a pure pay for skill, and there's some inherent issues with that. So I think it needs to have some balance to it. And then, like any organization has experienced the issue with, just because someone's very astute technically does not mean that they're going to be successful in a leadership position. So therefore, you need to have progression opportunities outside of the leadership track. And again, we've talked about mentor programs. And the next bullet is really goes back to the whole issue of being able to recruit out of the military. There's kind of the minimal support that is required of National Guardsmen and reservists, and then there's organizations that really promote and recognize that service. The last point on this slide is probably one of the most important that we can talk about, and that is the whole point of relevance. There's a lot of research that would say the most important question to assess the morale of an employee is simply this: is your job important to the success of your organization? AKA, are you relevant? And I think organizations have to do a much better job, especially with the millennials, of communicating how their role is important to the success of that organization. On the semi-skilled and unskilled, training programs up front, offline, to kind of get them used to the pace of the work, the work hardening, getting used to environmental conditions in a manufacturing facility, which are often significantly different than what they're used to. In my experience, we had tremendous success in retaining employees by putting together kind of a friend at work program where some of our more senior people, you would ensure that a new employee had somebody to eat with and work with them to kind of get them comfortable and have a source for information outside of their first line supervisor. Just a whole level of engagement and, as lean tools and opportunities to be more mentally engaged at work. And again, back to the whole question of or statement about relevance. So those are some of the recruiting and retention strategies. But here are a couple other things just to think about. What do you do now as you're trying to load the pipeline with new talent and you have this exodus of tribal knowledge, and how do you bridge that gap? Several organizations are making it very conducive for people as they retire to be able to stay on in part-time roles. Kind of retired subject matter experts that are, working 10 to 15 to 20 hours a week that are able to come back in and help pass on that knowledge. Y12, for example, is using a really, really neat software package where they're knowledge capture software package that they've developed in-house, and there's others out there. But basically, to document, this is how this process works, using the current subject matter experts to be able to retain that tribal knowledge. The other thing and we've touched on this to a certain extent, but human resources departments, by and large, are woefully inadequate at this point to handle the challenges that are coming down the pike. And I think organizations need to take a hard look at beefing up those departments to be prepared to handle, these human resource challenges. And I think organizations have to ask themselves, if people are truly your greatest asset, why would you outsource your recruiting process? And really think that through and become much more engaged in the recruiting process. Just a few final thoughts before we turn it over for questions. The train's coming. The economy is rebounding. If organizations don't address this, the term outrunning your headlights comes to mind. I mean, it don't let a lack of talent dampen your organization's potential to reap the benefits of an improving economy. And I think organizations have to recognize the game has changed. We are going to have to look at recruiting and retention a little differently than we have in the past. We have to put together a formal strategy and then execute that strategy. So with that, I'm going to flip it back over to Bob for questions.
Thanks, Chuck. A great presentation, and a lot of this parallels everything we've been hearing over the last number of years about this issue. We were talking about workforce development before the recession. We were talking about it during the recession. We've been talking about recruiting and retaining workers after the recession. So it's very, very timely, and we'll be tackling some of the questions that we've got on this issue from our audience. To that end, if you've got a question for Chuck, type that question into the Ask a Question box on the console and hit send. We'll get to as many of those as we have time for today. We also invite you to take our exit survey that'll pop up on your screen at the conclusion of the webcast. We use the answers from this to help improve this webcast program and others in the Plant Engineering webcast series. And as a reminder, we'll be sending out an email after the next week to let you know that the archive version of today's webcast will be available so you can show it to others in your organization who might be interested in this topic. You'll be able to find the webcast at www.plantengineering.com on our homepage. Just click on the webcast tab and you'll be able to find the resources there. We wanted to move on to the questions right now, and one of the first ones that came in was what we talked about, treating millennials a little differently. One of our attendees, Chuck, asked, what did you mean about treating the millennials the same as Gen X and baby boomers, and how is there a retention loss in doing this?
Oh, well, it's a great question. First of all, I think it's easy to stereotype millennials, and what we have so far is probably premature. Because we really haven't seen the millennials fully mature in the workplace yet. But the millennials, most of you have heard, the helicopter parent terminology, the constant feedback. If you think about it, I'm 50 years old. At my age, one or two kids on the team got a trophy, and if you look at with my kids, everybody gets a trophy. They're used to a different type of feedback. They need more of that. Is one distinction. So whereas with a Gen X or a baby boomer would probably on average require less performance feedback. The other part of this is what our research would say is the expectations for advancement. For millennials. Is significantly greater than what it has been for Gen Xers and baby boomers. And without some purposeful, coaching in this regard, there's a tendency to lose good people because they keep going on with an expectation that may not be realistic. So those are just a couple of examples of how millennials need to be managed a little differently. And I'll finish up with this statement on this question. My experience when I was running manufacturing organizations was that I was going to kind of treat everybody managed the same way. And in retrospect, I see that, has all sorts of potential for issues, and that you've got to recognize that different people require different types of feedback, mentoring, and coaching.
One of the things we've talked about extensively is this idea of having to do a better job of selling young people on the idea that they're not getting a job in manufacturing, that they're building a career, and while some of them may view any individual job as something that they will do for a shorter period of time. How do you go about talking about career building, even for those employees that you eventually may lose to another organization? How do you talk about the idea of building careers and career skills for people rather than just giving them a job to do?
I think you've got to, and again, this is a little bit dependent on what level we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Certainly at the salaried level, it's a little bit easier to get in front of a smaller group of people and let them know, where the organization's going, what opportunities are out there, training and development. It's not been as prevalent to do that with your hourly technical people, and certainly your hourly skilled and unskilled. But I think it's an area of focus that really needs to be addressed. Of what are the opportunities, and I again go back to my career. I don't remember ever having that discussion, with our hourly employees, whether they were semi-skilled or technical, of really having a formal conversation of here's the career path that you can have with this organization, and I think that's a mistake, and it's certainly something that needs to be rectified to improve the retention of those individuals.
And just in that one way, that's a change from the way business had been done a generation or certainly 2 generations ago in manufacturing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Another question from our audience: how broad do you address the succession plan for people in positions of individual contributors? Should targeted success be within the plant or further?
When I was doing succession planning, and I'll go back to my position with Maytag. I was responsible for 3 plants in the cooking division, and we would take our succession planning down to the supervisor level, from the VP of operations all the way down to the supervisor level, and also we would take engineers and technical team leaders, and they would be part of that succession planning. From this perspective, we would have the matrix showing those folks. We would evaluate each individual's potential for advancement. We would evaluate what their current performance is, and we'd also evaluate what their risk was of leaving. And that risk could be anything from, we knew that they were floating paper to pending retirement. So you would evaluate across those 3 criteria, and then look at who you've got in the organization that could be prepared to fill those slots, and evaluate what's the time frame. So if I've got a key person that's a finishing specialist or a finishing engineer, and I know that I don't have anybody that's in 2 years right at this current pace is going to be prepared to fill that job, that's the red flag. That's where I need to do the knowledge capture. That's where I need to accelerate somebody's development, or look outside for somebody that has those skill sets. But my thought is the whole succession planning, really needs to be a pretty broad net. And I think that's even more critical now as we see so much of this tribal knowledge getting ready to retire.
In that sense, it's not any different for what you're doing at U of T from the volunteer football team. You've got to have your first string, and you've got to have a way of filling those gaps if someone leaves or if someone gets hurt.
Now, Bob, I don't know why you had to bring up the UT football team today.
Well, no, even the UT football team has got to have a second string.
Yeah, we are rebuilding.
Yes, you are. We have this question from Elizabeth Villaroel, and I think it's a really good one. What are your thoughts about the differences between the percentage of men and women in manufacturing jobs?
Well, my experience has been it tends to vary in which department of the plant and what type of manufacturing. Um, and again, I'm just speaking off my experience. But some of the assembly type jobs, and I don't know if there's any truth to this, but where it tends to go is women tend to have a better level of dexterity for high speed assembly, and my experience has seen women gravitate towards that. And then some of the other areas of the plant, some of the fabrication and more standalone equipment tend to be, have a higher percentage of men in those areas. But I think as we become more automated and the skill sets change, I really don't see that there should be any gender bias to, what the manufacturing jobs of the future are.
And that ties into this next question from Ken Stuckey. It flows right into his question. Are there any good mechanical assessments to give employees and potential employees to determine if they have the skills and abilities to do technical, mechanical, and automation work? He says we have good opportunities that require a technical person, but rather than always going to the outside for help, we want to promote from within as much as we can.
Well, obviously there's some very good skills assessments out there. And I think this is a great question. And again, I think you've got to be recruiting for not only the technology that you have today, but you've got to be recruiting for a significantly higher level of technology that you're going to have in the next 5 to 10 years. So those assessments are there and pretty easy to find through the internet of different things. But and just to address kind of the part B of that question in terms of whether you fill jobs internally or externally, obviously from a morale standpoint, you want to try to promote from within when it makes sense, and you want to have the training and development to make those opportunities, will make people ready when those opportunities avail themselves. But I've always felt like whether it's in engineering or in technical jobs, and this is again, just based on my personal experience, I like to have about an 80-20 split, promoting from within 80% of the time and setting up the training and development that's conducive to that, but also trying to pull in from the outside about 20% just to get new ideas and a different perspective.
Marius Mudayoba from Timken was asking, for skilled hourly workers, what are some examples of progression opportunities outside of the leadership track? And I think this is a great question because we always think about employees moving up through the organization from an hourly position to salary, to supervision, to management, and that's not always the best progression track for a lot of workers. As I think you pointed out during the course of the webcast, what they want to know is the relevance of their job and the appreciation for the skill level that an individual brings to the work that they do on a continuing basis. So, how do you continue to progress people within the organization without necessarily making them a supervisor or a manager?
Well, a lot of it depends on how you organize your organizational structure. One of the things that we put in place, and I'm going back to my time with TRW Automotive, one of the reasons we did this was we had this talent that was coming up that was kind of hitting their ceiling. But even more so, the business need that was driving is we were struggling, retaining tribal knowledge within a department as engineers kind of moved on and moved up and moved out. So we created an hourly technician position, which was a higher rate of pay, where we could use a very skilled, technically astute hourly employee to do engineering type work, at some level. And some of these, became so adept that we even created another level above that, which was a salary technician level, and promoted people up through that career track. And it was a tremendous success in terms of keeping some really very, very talented people and within our organization and even within a department in that organization. So you had some continuity as supervisors changed, as engineers changed, as department heads changed. You had this real strong knowledge base with these hourly and salary technicians.
We have a comment and a question from Don Sellinger. He says, the problem I see is that millennials pose a threat to Gen Xers and baby boomers because of their attitudes of wanting to advance quickly in an organization. They see the Gen Xers and baby boomers as not mentors, but as barriers on their way to advancing in the organization. How do you approach this problem?
That's an interesting perspective. I don't know that I have seen or have really seen that the same thing from my experience. So it's hard for me to answer that question because I really haven't seen that as the issue. I can certainly see that perspective and that it could be, but I really haven't tried to address that.
Very good. How much weight should you be giving to attitude and soft skills of those you're trying to recruit? Is this more important for certain positions than others? I think this is another great question because you touched on it earlier, is that there's technical things that you need to be able to do, but they also need to be able to work within the context of a structured organization.
Well, I think the soft skills are incredibly important, and certainly more so, I think, now than even in the past. And this was an area I mentioned earlier when I was with Emerson Electric. When they brought potential new hires in, they did a lot of exercises in the training class up front before they were ever really hired. And the coaches in the room would look for, the people that could work well with others and those that struggle. And you hate to say all or nothing, but our strategy was, if you didn't display the ability to collaborate and work well, we didn't have a slot for you. Yeah. Because so many of the jobs, are going to require, that ability to work well with others. And that's kind of a neat thing about these millennials. And again, you hate to stereotype too much, but collaborative work environments is one of their strengths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing we learned in kindergarten: work and play well with others, and share and communicate. It all ultimately comes back to that. But we lose track of some of those skills over the course of time, and it's in the plants that I've been in this year, and I've been in a lot of them. You see the ability to work independently, but also to collaborate to solve problems as a team, and that's what a lot of modern manufacturing wants and needs as they continue to grow. One other question from our audience. When key technical people are looking to retire, are you considering offering part-time positions to retired individuals to help in that transition of the technical knowledge?
Absolutely. This is one of the things that Eastman Chemical is doing up in Kingsport, Tennessee. As they see this problem coming, they have set up the kind of a subject matter expert code, where they can take some of these, real strong technical people, both in salary and hourly, and give them the opportunity to come back and work part-time. And a lot of people, that's a very attractive thing. They want to retire, but they don't want to completely retire. And certainly for the organization, it is a tremendous asset to have somebody that's kind of there to help bridge this gap as you bring up these younger employees and bring them up to speed. I think it's a tremendous strategy.
One question I have, based on the conversations I've had with a lot of manufacturers and in talking to folks about this issue at all levels of the manufacturing spectrum, from the association level down to the school level, what's the one mistake that manufacturers are making right now in terms of wrestling with this problem of retention and recruitment, and what's the one thing they can do to overcome that shortfall?
I think the biggest issue, and this is my opinion, right? So,
right.
I think that the human resources department have got to become re-engaged in hiring talent, and for all sorts of reasons. We've started to rely, I think, far too heavily on temp-to-hire agencies and recruiters. And again, if people are your most important asset, You know, that ought to be a core competency of the HR department, is to go out and find and attract top talent and be able to evaluate that. And there's, one of the scariest things is to hire somebody based on a 45-minute interview. You don't have to. There's all sorts of evaluation interview techniques and other things, networking, to hedge your bet to make sure you get a good employee.
One of the things we've seen and we've talked about continuously is that idea of making sure that manufacturing has a place at the kitchen table when families and young people are discussing careers that they might want to go into. Manufacturing may not always get that person, but for a long time they weren't even in the discussion. And now the momentum and the tide seems to be turning back toward at least considering manufacturing as a career choice and exploring the things that are necessary to identify what it is I'm going to need to do in order to get that job, as well as what the opportunities and benefits of getting such a job in the medium term and long term are going to be. And I know the programs like the ones at UT are really involved in trying to help bridge that relationship between the young people and the manufacturers.
I absolutely agree, and I think manufacturing has had this stigma over the last 20 years. I mean, plants shutting down, job losses, layoffs, and again, we're starting to see that tide turn. And for all of us old manufacturing Neanderthals, we're pretty thrilled about that. But I think that message has got to get out. And right to the point of organizations in their local communities have got to take the lead on doing that and going speaking to high schools and letting them know. I mean, here are the opportunities. Here's the cool stuff that you can do. In our organization, these are and it's kind of, you almost have to look at it like the military is doing now as they recruit. Here are the great things that you can do. The technology that you're going to be exposed to. If you join the military, I think there's a similar track that manufacturing organizations can use. I mean, here's some of the things that we do, at Eastman Chemical or at, wherever, Alcoa. Here's some of the technology that avails itself or is available for you to participate in.
And I think if you can put education, manufacturing, and the civic and political leaders together, you've not only created a skilled workforce that can fill the immediate needs, but it allows communities to go out and recruit new manufacturers to come in to a community that already has a baseline for a skilled workforce that they can deliver to a prospective manufacturer that wants to come into the community.
No, absolutely. And I think community organizations have got to recognize that, when a potential manufacturer is looking, I mean, the school systems are always, a big driver, on whether somebody wants to locate a plant there. I mean, I used to be on those teams, looking for site locations, and I mean, it's significant, and the communities have got to recognize that.